Welcome to Wealthy Women Warriors Tribe Thrive, helping women in workplaces go from idea to impact without burning out. This show empowers women in workplaces with learning and development tools to transform culture with an impactful action. This is the third part of a three-part series entitled Socialized Behaviors That Trigger Implicit Bias and Microaggressions. How to change the workplace culture from within. This is our final episode. It's going to touch on a very touchy subject, which is the white woman violence. And a lot of this is also detailed in the wonderful book that both Dr. Cami Anderson and Dr. Joy Wiggins co-authored together. I'm ecstatic for us to dive into this because it is something that we absolutely need to look at. And it is 100% part of helping to, not 100%, sorry, pardon me. It's a huge percentage, shall we say. Not 100%, ladies. Let's face it, it's not just us. But a huge part of shifting our workplace culture and the toxicity that many are experiencing. So I welcome both of you. We've had 2 episodes already. This is our 3rd episode. We've talked already about individual socialization. We've talked about microaggressions within the workplace. And now we're diving into what has been labeled white woman violence. So let's talk about white woman violence. Let's label it, let's explore it, and then let's look at 3 solutions of helping to transform it.
Who wants to
go first?
I can maybe tell you some resources that have been helpful for me. I think Catrice Jackson is a great person to start with that talks about white women violence. So if white women want to educate themselves on what exactly she means by that and what is meant by white women violence, it's Catrice Jackson, called the Becky Code. We also talk about it in our book, but if you really want to dig deeply into it, she's a good person to look at. The other book that I think is really good is called They Were Her Property by Stephanie Jones Rogers. And it talks about the history of slavery and what white women were doing to Black women and children and during slavery. And I think that really sets the tone for why there is distrust, not only distrust, but actual violence between white women and Black women in particular. So I think that's if white women are looking at this and they want to be educated and they want to start even attending seminars around this and educating themselves so that they can be better allies and stop the micro and macro aggressions against women, women of color and Black women in particular. Those 2 books are very good for that. So I would start maybe with that, and then would you all like to? I would.
I think I would also.
Well, I think it's looking at. Well, actually, Cami, why don't you dive into this? Yes. We've all had. I think across the board. I don't think there's a woman out there that has not experienced what it is like to be on the receiving end of white woman violence, and a lot of it is intentional. A lot of it is done to capitalize. A lot of it is done to raise positioning. A lot of it is done to, cut the knees off of someone so that someone else can get ahead.
Right.
And with that, there are many different experiences of it. And as we were talking on a couple of different calls, we were talking about the layers that happen. Like, it's one thing for a white woman to feel white woman or to receive white woman violence. It's another thing for, a different culture, race to experience that. And so, we kind of laughed when I said, actually, Cami, let's have you talk about this. But I think it's important that we look at these elements through a lens of awareness.
Right.
And for many white women, that awareness is missing when it comes to ethnicity.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, no.
I can hear you.
You can't hear me?
I can.
Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh.
But Andrea, you can't hear her?
I can't hear her.
Oh no.
I can hear you though. That's weird. Well, isn't that just interesting?
Isn't that just interesting? Isn't that true? Where's the voice?
Oh my goodness.
Let me just carefully, I'm going to just do one quick thing here.
Let's see. I'm ready because I got something to say.
I know you do.
Oh my goodness.
That is crazy.
I know.
Not.
We can keep talking.
You could. Oh no.
How about that?
Now you're back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. And here comes Joy. Okay, well, we just had a little, there we go. Okay.
We just had to we had to change it up. You know, this is really intense conversation. We had to make sure that y'all were really following us here.
Oh my gosh, that couldn't have been like more crazy. Okay.
Any more well and any more perfect.
Right.
In a way, because
Point.
it just brings home the point, doesn't
Right.
it?
But one of the things that I was going to start to say was I think it's important that we operationalize violence, because a lot of times when we hear the word violence, we assume the extreme. And it's important for us to know that no, you might not be in the workplace. And notice I say might, because who depends where you work, but you might not be physically touching someone in a way that's going to inflict harm. But there are still ways in which you are inflicting harm on a person in the workplace, and that is also considered violent. So what might be seen as not physical altercations in terms of fighting and this, that, and the other are still considered violence in the workplace. And I think it's really important that we say that, because a lot of times we'll hear the word violence, and because we equate it with that, we dismiss it as something that we don't do. And we miss the places where really we probably are doing that. So I think it's really important that that's clear for folks. Like, don't dismiss the violence as something that you might not be a party to. Really listen to the things that we're saying so that you can find those areas. And I know Andrea and I were talking a little bit about what some examples of those things might be. And, we were talking about the instance of crime. And for a Black woman, when I was telling her that as a Black woman, one of the things I fear is getting into a conversation with a white woman and she getting so worked up, tears come, because now I'm the bad guy because she's crying. And that is a form of violence. And the question that came up was, well, is it really that, or is it just that we're in frustrations? But understanding, when are the tears frustration, and when are the tears a way to divert attention from the wrong that you might be doing, in order to make sure that you are no longer held accountable for the things that you're saying and the things that you might be doing in that moment. And those are the things we have to be really careful about when it comes to understanding those places where on the outside it does not look violent, but to the person that is receiving it, it is absolutely violent.
And it's like, I think that one of the lines that I really loved in the Becky Code was she talked about how we wake up, and I'm not going to say this verbatim, but she talks about how we're essentially tiptoeing through social landmines, and that every day there is great lengths that women are going through to either walk around these landmines or actually ignite these landmines, depending on, the positioning of the person. And so I think when we look at that, it's looking at, again, it's understanding what's behind all of it and knowing that there's power in the pause. And we talked about that as well, Kemi, where we were looking at it from the perspective of taking a moment, and you shared a very important situation where what you said, those words had such power for me hearing them, was that now I'm sitting in this very public place And I'm a Black woman sitting beside a white woman who's crying.
Mhm.
And what is the rest of the culture then going to interpret about me as the Black woman who's trying to educate or share or even just gain footing on a situation that likely has been going out of control?
Yeah, because with that particular situation, I was trying to explain why I felt a particular way about an event that happened. And as I was saying in the story, like, her voice starts to escalate and I can feel her getting worked up. And then the tears come. She starts crying in the midst of our conversation. And I had to say, you know what? Let's take 10 minutes and not have this conversation in a very public place. We're going to have it in my office if the door closed. That's where we're going to talk about this, because I am not going to sit here outside in the middle of a college campus that has very few of me already to begin with while you are in tears. So get yourself together and we'll finish this conversation somewhere else, because it's not going to be here, in order for us to make sure that we're able, because you still need this education. You still need to know that you are in the wrong. You're not going to use this moment as an opportunity for me to now, I'm not going to pat you, I will say, and I'm not going to pat you on the back and say, oh, whoa, it's going to be okay. No, because you're in the wrong. You're the one that's in the wrong. And I'm not going to let you run away from that. We're still going to have this conversation. It's just not going to happen here. So we're going to take a moment so that we can have this conversation in a place where you are not going to have tears, or where the tears are not going to be as powerful.
And I think, as from the white woman perspective, the things that I think that white women can do when they start to feel like they're being attacked or whatever, is to suspend that need to deny and to defend, and just to listen. And if you are really in a place of wanting to listen and to better yourself and your behavior, then when you have to understand the impact of tears and what that has done to Black men as well. If we think about how white women have cried wolf, Emmett Till, he was killed because a white woman lied about being, harassed by him. So understanding the history too of what tears do. And when you start to cry, not only in the present moment does it also make Camille look like the bad person, but there's a history of it. And there's a long history of actual physical violence. And then
entire cities have been destroyed because women have lied about instances. Cities of full Black cities that were burnt to the ground because a white woman lied.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's one of our points in the book, is to know that history. And when you know the history, then you can see why that's so problematic. And Camille and I had the opportunity to do a great session, and we're actually going to do it on the Forum on Workplace Inclusion, about mending the broken trust between Black and white women. And how do we have these conversations in ways where white women can be held accountable, can be responsible, can become better allies, and to really listen in ways that they can make impactful change, rather than just trying to defend themselves or deny that it's happening. Because if we flip it and we think about, well, what if this were a conversation with a man, and a man was starting to cry as soon as you said what you did was sexual harassment, or what you did was a microaggression? Imagine if the men just did that, and then they could be absolved. And then also, what you were saying, Camille, about the public atmosphere of it. You already have, that woman can then use that as leverage against you later, to say, well, everybody saw in the university square what was happening, or, and so that's also gathering evidence against Camille. So you have to be so cognizant of what you're doing and the ways in which you are deflecting from what she's trying to tell you, because really she's giving you a gift. Camille is giving you a gift by telling you what you're doing. And not only is she also trying to hold you accountable, but she's giving you a gift by saying, look, I know that you can be better. And I'm going to have the hope that you can be better. I don't really know if you can be, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
That you can do better. And that's when I think that when we see how we can educate others around what's happening, and especially when it becomes with white women and Black women in particular because of our history, that is a gift. And that someone has enough faith in you at some point to tell you what's happening.
Right.
And to watch yourself in your own triggering that you think, oh, I'm going to defend myself. Oh, I'm going to, no, this can't be true. That's not me. That actually, there's a history of your socialization that is true about you, that you are actually doing these things. And the better we are to understand that we are socialized with this idea of white superiority, or the ways that we've been through our history and through our ancestry have been told that we have this right as white women to treat Black women this way. When we start to acknowledge that, then I think it's much easier for us to say, okay, I'm going to listen and I'm going to suspend whatever denial I'm going to try. And at least now ask this person, what would you like for me to do? And I will, amend the things that I have been doing, these behaviors that I have been doing, not only that have been socialized in me, but just things I've taken advantage of. And I've just, been going through the world doing my thing.
And I think really, we talked about the power of the pause.
Yes.
In that moment, the power of the pause is, as the white woman, to take a breath.
Yeah.
To stop for a moment. Because, just like we talked about how microaggressions can create paralysis. Sometimes these situations can create the tears, but the tears don't get to stay. I think that's the point that you're trying to articulate, is that we can have a response, but that response doesn't get to be the only response. That response can be a wake-up call. And if it is, I think for people in the workplace, when you have a genuine desire to want to move forward, it is a wake-up call, isn't it? And it can be a learning. And I think positioning it as such, as it is a learning. Oh, lost Cabby there for a second. Here she's coming. There we go. Power in the pause.
This is an intense conversation that people need to hear, because technology always fails when it's something that people need to hear.
There is so much truth in there. There's so much truth in that. So, I think when we're in those moments, it's the moment of taking a breath, because the body cannot decipher between anxiety and excitement. Yeah. And in that moment, guaranteed, both of you are filled with anxiety. And yet, if we can take that pause and we can take a breath in, and we can just, even as the white woman, say, just give me a moment. Man, just give me a moment. I need to internalize what it is that you are saying to me right now, so that I can hear you. Right. So that I can be present with you. So that I can understand you.
Yeah, and I think that socialization part is key too, because in the moment of being able to listen and being able to hear and being able to be in that moment, you also have to be able to ask yourself, is my response because of a genuine type of feeling, or is my response because of the ways in which our patriarchal system has set us up as women? Is that I have always been pitted against the woman of color as exotic in terms of these other types of desires that these men have had. I've always been put in competition with this woman. So is this me feeling the vestiges of that, or is it something else? We got to be able to ask ourselves that question too, because neither one of those, that's not on us. That's on the men that set up the systems that said, hey, I'm married to you, but I'm going to do over here with her. And what that how that made you feel about me as a woman of color. Because it's not that I was the choice, but it feels that way. And especially if we going back to our period of enslavement and all of the things that happened there. So being able to ask those questions to make sure that it's a genuine feeling and not necessarily something that you might be conditioned to feel because of the way that those patriarchal systems are set up for us.
Yeah, it's those patterns of relationships that were set up a long time ago. That, you know, when we think about when the plantation homes and having the master having affairs, you know, rape, really.
Right.
Um,
All of
yeah.
it is.
And then how white, I think 12 Years a Slave kind of illustrated that pretty well.
Absolutely.
Just how that was happening. And then how does this then, within the waves of the feminist movement, how have Black and white women also been pitted against each other by the patriarchy? And we talk about, you know, many different metaphors like crabs in a bucket or whatever. But because of the structure of white supremacist patriarchy, we have been pitted against each other, and it's behooved the patriarchy to keep us pitted against each other. And that's within many different intersections of our identities, but really between racial lines, that's where it comes up the most. And until white women start to become more accountable and responsible for the ways in which they are, you know, inflicting violence on Black women in particular and other women of color, only then can we really start to have that solidarity. Can we? And that is a lot of work on the white women to build trust and to
especially when there isn't trust to start with.
There's no trust at, you know,
there's no trust to start with
ever. And how even now, you know, you may be doing your absolute best to think that you're being an ally, but there's still so many layers that, you know, it's going to take a long time, and you may never get the trust.
And even with that, like trying your best to be an ally, like Joy and I, we talk about this in the book. Allyship is not something you give yourself, it's something that's given to you. So are you calling yourself an ally because somebody else said that you were, or because that you want to be in that moment?
Yeah.
And it's only within you being called an ally by someone else is a representation, it's a manifestation of that trust. But if you are the only one calling yourself ally, that means there's no trust there. And you have to really pay attention to those things too. You can't walk around, I'm an ally, and an ally, and nobody is saying, yes, you are.
Yeah, and I think you have to continue that trust. You have to continue. You can't just say, oh, I've been an ally, and this person has said I'm an ally in this one situation, so I'm good. You know, I think it's a continuous, constant reiteration of that.
And it evolves. It changes.
Yeah. It does. And
yeah,
absolutely. And as culture evolves and changes, so does this. And so when we look about, you know, there's so many different programs right now for women. You know, it doesn't matter what city you go to, there's at least 8. You can, you know, Toronto women groups, there's like 1 million that show up. Where I'm trying to go with this, though, is that I think what happens is that we start as like the only, but we forget that we still have to be the advocate, and we still have to be the person who seeks out relationships and seeks out learning and seeks out understanding in order for these elements to shift and change. And I don't know, you know, part of me questions when we take it back to leadership, we take it back to what's happening in leadership. And when we look at the elements about repetition and reinforcement, how do we learn? Repetition, reinforcement, repetition, reinforcement. So when there are these acts of violence that are happening, regardless of whether it's, and I think ethnicity is a layer that is very thick. And, you know, when I look at it, I think ethnicity is just like this big, you know, it's like 7, 8, 9, 10 chunks of the earth that's layered on top of it. I think the first layer is looking at the patriarchal element. The second layer is looking at how women are pitted against each other. And then we add in ethnicity and all of how that compounds the entire topic. When we look at how we're moving things forward, though, these are the elements that I think as women we do need to be more acutely aware of. And one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about this was because I think I had shared this with you earlier. I have many meetings with many different people in the Corps. And one of the meetings that I had was with, the president of a really well-known company. And we sat down and we talked about the women's initiatives. And my intention was to go in to, talk about the fact that, 90% of the programs that are happening within that company right now are not paid. And looking at how that's impacting mental health and how that's impacting leave and how that's impacting the women and the equality dynamic. And he said to me, Andrea, you've been so open and so honest with all of the elements around the women's initiatives, around diversity and inclusion. That's what I love about you. So I'm going to say something to you and I want you to take this in. And he said to me point blank, the women's initiative will not change until women start supporting women. And as men, we know that.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm glad that he said that.
And I'm so I was so thankful. I have a great deal of respect for this man because in that moment, it was the impact, the reality of his words falling on my ears and understanding, wait a second. It wasn't really and truly until last year that I understood what white woman violence looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was directed at me and I actually experienced what that looks like by a group that says that they are there to support women moving forward.
Yeah.
That was impactful because his words were entirely correct.
Yeah.
And that in itself is also impactful. So it's not just it's not that this gender gap is the issue. Man to woman.
Right.
It's woman to woman. And then we layer in ethnicity on top of that.
And then
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Finish.
What I was going to say was that, and that truly is why things are so messy, and why we're so scared. And within that same element, so many men that I've worked with and done training with have said, I am terrified to make a mistake because if I make a mistake, it's public, and my reputation will be perceived in a certain way.
Right.
So go ahead.
It's got me thinking. It's like everything that you're saying has got me looking at this as, because we've done this in 3 parts, right? So we have where like this foundation of how we're socialized and our understanding of how we're socialized, but then understanding how that socialization kind of leads us to have these certain types of biases and microaggressions in terms of how we're dealing with each other, and how the impact of multiple instances of us demonstrating and manifesting these implicit biases and these microaggressions lead to this form of violence that gets to be so insidious in the workplace that now it's difficult for anybody to work. Right. I can't do this but all of this starts from that very first thing, that this is what we've been trained to do. So being able to really start at that first thing is in order to get to the crux of where we are right now. So we drop this stone in the water and we see all of these ripples, and we see the ripples starting to come in, but it's coming in on one thing. And that is the ways that we've been trained in, raised and taught and ingrained in us to believe. I was even thinking about like in school, when you were in school and you were too smart, what that meant. And when there was 2 smart girls in one class, what did that mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What did it mean to have two girls who were equally smart in the same class? And then add to that, oh, one of them might be Latinx or Black or indigenous or Asian. And now, oh, we've got this. And and we're starting to see.
Or Muslim, right?
So when you get to work, and now you get to a place where you're at work, and now you have the two smart girls have now turned into the two women looking for the manager position. So then, and the crowd around are no longer students. It's our colleagues, it's our peers, it's our supervisors, but they're still kind of behaving like those kids did in the classroom when the two smart girls went head to head. And the things that are said. Now we're older, so the vocabulary is different, but it's still being said. And how do we now we have to break all of that up. We have to change, we have to mature the class too. We have to mature the class from class to workplace. We're now adults. We have a level of maturity, a level of understanding that we now have to apply. We can't keep the same grade school mentality when it comes to looking at the two smart girls go for what they're going for.
Yeah, I think that, and that's when it comes into, as somebody that works in education, that's something that I tell my students all the time. They're training to be teachers. And so I talk to them about having these critical conversations very early so that they can start to see how are these patterns of culture that they have learned when they were in grade school, and how does it show up in the workplace? How are they reifying that again and again and again? Because they're not investigating or critically looking at the way they've been socialized. So all they know to do is the default is to reify that again and again. So when we look at education,
go on the attack.
Right.
Yeah. Go on the attack.
How are, you think about, like, I a lot of times we bring in our workshops about Mean Girls and all the videos, the film and the advertisements and the sitcoms and everything.
Disney movie. Every single Hallmark movie has a mean girl. Every single one.
In some way to get the man's attention. It's always in competition, and to them it sees men as powerful. And so if that's really about gaining access to power. And so when we are seen as little girls and middle schoolers to fight with each other to gain access to power, because there's not enough for all of us. So if we don't start to deconstruct that idea from a very early age, then we're not going to see it all of a sudden manifest itself in the workplace like magic. So it's really looking at how are we educating our girls and boys to look at the way we've been socialized and to disrupt it, and to have the language and the wherewithal to actually interrupt every single time they see a message. And that's something I've been doing with my daughter. Every show that she watches, I allow her to watch different shows. And I say, just the questions I want you to ask every time is, who has power? And if it's, if the Black character is always the sidekick to the main white male character, or even with a main white woman character or girl character, look at that. What does that say to you as the viewer about what the role is of that Black character if they're always on the side? So how do we center and center the marginalized experiences so that we see that as normal, and that's a normalized thing, and that women can be supportive of each other across racial barriers and lines. So how do we, and that's our whole point too, is that if we really want to be feminist and we really want to look at solidarity, we have to look at our history. We have to look at our socialization first. And then we also have to look at, how am I going to be responsible for that history that I bring with me? Even though I feel like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. That's not my choice. But you still are bringing it with you, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you bring up the example with your daughter, because my daughter and I, we just did that last night. We're watching Casey Undercover, and we're talking through, because there's a story arc where the white sidekick, because there's a white sidekick, because Casey is a Black protagonist, a Black female protagonist, and she decides that she wants to do what Casey does. So I had to take a moment. I said, I asked my daughter, I said, can she do that? I said, do you think that she can do what Casey does? And she was like, no. I said, well, why do you think she can? And she's like, well, because she thinks she can fight. I said, well, can she fight? No. Show me instances where you can see that she can't fight. They never show her fighting, mommy. They never show her fighting. So I don't know why she thinks she can fight, because they never show her fighting. So she's rationalizing this is a skill thing. It's not, but the way that the story arc is going, it really is about envy. It's about going back into this white woman violence thing that we're talking about. Because the way that the storyline is going to go, folks are going to get hurt in the end because she wasn't necessarily thinking about herself. She was thinking about the power that she thought she could have, being just like her Black girlfriend.
Yeah.
But really having those conversations with my daughter around that, okay, now, but I need you to show me the evidence that she can. And if you can't see the evidence that she can't, well, why is she so pressed to have this position? If she's never seen her fight, why does she think she can fight? And my daughter's like, I don't know. She's sick,
like,
but still.
Looking at that envy piece, I think is really important too, because I do think a friend of mine and I were talking about this, and she said, why? And she goes, why do you white women want to be like women of color? And I said, we're jealous. That's I think that's what it is. And I think there's so many layers to it. And
I would agree with that. Because the jealousy then goes back to the history of not being loved enough to be intimate with that master.
Yes. Your relationship was strictly transactional so that he can have heirs to be able to inherit this plantation. But that is something else, because those babies are never going to get this plantation. So what is it that keeps you going back there? And that envy does start to come in. We create these meta narratives, like we were talking about the meta narratives. We then create a meta narrative that we take with us and we instill in our own children. So when her daughter marries a plantation owner and then they get their set of slaves, she now teaches her daughter what she felt, and here we are. We're no longer in the period of we're no longer in that period of enslavement. We're no longer in that period of enslavement, but the narrative is still been passed through.
Sure.
So we still have this. It's not that it's slavery, but it is, okay, I'm going to call it something else. I'm now going to say that it's not that she's a slave, but affirmative action is to blame.
Well, and then there's the loophole.
Opportunities. And we start to create the excuses that it can justify our envy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the justification of the envy is really justification of envy, jealousy, because those two really do go hand in hand.
Yeah.
The jealousy is what leads to the violence in many ways, especially in the workplace.
Yeah, but I think it's important that we realize that jealousy is not, it's what we've been trained to do. I think that's really important to hone in on that part. We've been trained to be jealous.
Yeah.
We've been socialized to be jealous. And it's not that the jealousy is supposed to exist there. We just haven't seen our lives without it.
And that's crucial, because that's the piece where I think that we implode as women. We implode because the moment that we decide that we're going to take the burden of the shame of what has happened and what we've been socialized to behave and act with, then that's the moment where we are almost paralyzed in knowing how to then move forward. And if we continue to play in the arena of shame, we cannot move into a change within our dynamic.
Right.
And so it's giving that moment of forgiveness of self, becoming aware of the difference and the different action steps that can be taken, and then allowing the conversation and the dialogue to start to change.
Right. And that's really what forgiveness is, right? Being able to be aware of the places where we might have failings, being able to acknowledge the failings of the folks that we're dealing with, and then saying, okay, let's heal. Now let's heal. Now that I know what yours are, you know what mine are. Okay, now let's work together. But once you start to hide those failings, the forgiveness can't happen.
I think too, it's like I think of it like the legacy of socialization. And if you can see it as a legacy of socialization, that it's not if you inherited privilege, but you did inherit privilege. Now, what are you going? It's not if you did or not.
Mm-hmm.
You did.
Yes, you have. You
have.
inherited this legacy of socialization and these patterns of behavior that have existed for now centuries.
Mhm.
So how do we now start to be responsible for that and say, okay, now I know that I'm carrying this and I don't want to carry it, but I know that I am carrying it and I have to be responsible for it because this is what my ancestors have done. And I think it's really about being responsible for that. And then now knowing that you now can be the catalyst for change. You are the one, as you know, as a white woman, you are the one to now talk to the white supremacist patriarchy because you are second in there, right? You are kind of like the one that can change it. And I think that's really important for white women to understand that they can talk to, I mean, 53% of white women voted for Trump. So they are aligning with the white supremacist patriarchy. So how do we now start to turn around and say, wait a second, we need to change this. And white women are the ones to do that. They really are. If they're going to change the minds of white men and changing the structure, that is the responsibility of white women to do that and to be that catalyst for change and to step out on those limbs and stop hiding behind. I'm getting kind of.
No. That
It makes sense because if we're thinking about it, because even with Andrea, with your example of the president of the company, we see it, which means they're watching your responses. They're not really looking at mine because they're expecting me to want to fight and challenge and say, nah, this isn't right. And so they're able to dismiss that easily with the stereotypes that they've associated with us. But but they're watching you all. Well, how are you going to respond? Are you going to come against me too? Or are you just going to keep going with me like you've been doing? And so that's what they're paying attention to. They expect us to be against and out anti and like, hey, let's break all this down. But they're watching you to see if you agree with us. And their actions actually dictate your actions. So if you say, yeah, we're doing this and it's not temporary, they can't introduce anything that can kind of say, well, what can we insert to divide this back up? It's like, no, solidarity means the chain is unbreakable.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the key point. You know, it is our responsibility. It's not just a, hey, let's do this. It is our responsibility as white women to change the dialogue and to start supporting and bringing people forward. Right. And I think where we get stuck, and this, I have seen this over and over and over again, is that women take on allies and they take on people that they feel should have their back. And then when they don't have your back and they go and they start gossiping on a different layer in a different way, you've made a choice to move something forward. I'm going to use a workplace analogy. So 3 women came to the table. All 3 had different ideas to move one project forward. Instead of choosing the woman that maybe you're good friends with, you chose the other person's proposal. That's enough to spiral those internal thoughts that, oh, she's no longer my ally. She's no longer my friend. She's out to get me. And in that's the dialogue. That's the dialogue
and that's when you need to talk to her about it.
Right.
And that's when when you have 2 women going up for positions of power, how can they strategize together to make sure that they don't say, this isn't about, I mean, so let's say if the woman did say, your proposal wasn't as solid, so I didn't choose it, but let me tell you how to make it more solid. Let me help you with that.
That's right.
You know, that's the piece. That's where that broken link happens, because that's when the spiraling of like, oh my gosh, she hates me. She's not, she's not here for me. She's not supporting me. And then I'm going to go gossip about her over here. Yeah. And, and I think that's huge.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, being able to, so I wanted to identify a situation like that because as I did, both of you sat up in your chairs and you were like, yeah, I know that one.
Yeah.
And we all know that one. And it's the behavior after that needs to change, as you articulated, Joy. And that's the piece where it's like, okay, even if we are going to make the decision, because we do have to make choices when it comes to business, we still have to have enough respect for the women coming up to still continue to support them.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's the element that will stop the aspects that we're faced with, as well as if every woman out there could just stop the gossip. And that's one of the things that I will say. Every woman I meet says they don't gossip, myself included.
Oh, I gossip.
And we all do it.
Mhm.
I really do.
We all do it. But what if we stopped? What if instead of the workplace gossip, we chose to talk about something else?
Mhm.
And we chose to look at things that empowered, and we chose to look at elements that allowed people to move forward.
Right. Like, one of the things that I always say, like, if it's before I open my mouth about someone at work, I have to think, what am I willing to share what I'm about to say with that person for their growth?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no, I don't say it. I'm not even going to do it, because if I'm not willing to, then, because it goes back to owning whatever comes out of your mouth. Because, we gossip. The gossiping part is, I'm saying this, but when it gets back to you, you're not going to know where it came from. Versus, no, if this person was standing right here, I would say, you have the tendency to, and this is how you can fix it. And if I'm not willing to do that, then I don't need to say anything. Because
Right.
I've got to be willing to, because it's going to come back. When it comes back, walk them through it. Yes, I did say that. And I've done, and that's happened to me before. I've said something in the workplace and it says, well, somebody told me that you said such and such. I did, because you weren't there. But since you are here, let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And just shock, like, you're admitting that you said it? Uh-huh. I am admitting I did
talk
say
to you about it.
it. I did say it, and this is why I said it. This is what and I would not like to say it ever again.
And I think too, it's important to realize, what do we think gossip is?
Yeah.
Exactly. Because sometimes women, I was talking to somebody and they're like, I'm just verbally processing this so I can understand the situation better. And this was more like a personal friendship thing. But I think that it gets blurred at work as well. Like, you want to verbally process the motivation behind what another woman said or did with another woman colleague to see. And so that also, like, is that gossip then? Because then, like Camille says, if you're willing to talk to that woman about it, I think, especially when we think about power and who's in power. So if it's a woman boss that you're having an issue with, and you're talking to a colleague that is in parallel power with you, and you're trying to figure out how to go then talk to the boss about this thing. Because I think that's the other thing about microaggressions, is that it can be, you have to be careful, because the power dynamics can be that, if you just had a microaggression inflicted on you and you want to be able to tell your boss about how they did that or how they microaggressed against you, then you have to have a good conversation about what's your strategy to talk to them about it.
But I also think that's why we need to make sure that we have affinity groups in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because it's not for you to go to your colleague that is in the same unit as you to have this conversation.
You
might have an equal in a different unit that you can have this conversation with. Like, I know a lot of, like, when I was working at the university, when I had issues with women at work, I wasn't going to the other women at work. I was going to my girlfriends who have the same position that I have outside of that. So when I'm trying to verbally process something, I'm not verbally processing it with somebody at work. I'm verbally processing it with somebody who I know is going to give me constructive critique about, hey, check my site on this, because this is how I see it. Am I right or am I wrong? So that I can be able to go back fueled. And when you have affinity groups in the workplace, you allow the space for that. Yo, this just happened. How should I feel about this? And they can say, yep, that happened to me. And this is one of the things that I did, but it didn't work. So let me suggest this thing instead. And
I think that's, when we come down to, again, that also looks at the way that men and women network different.
Mhm.
And, when we look at how, and Harvard has just released a number of really great research studies on this, in that, when something happens to men in workplace situations, they will seek out other men who have experienced that element. Whereas women typically don't. Women are still more apt to go and talk to their best girlfriend about it versus going to speak to someone in their professional league and ask, how did you navigate through these waters?
Right.
And so that's where gossip lives more greatly in with women, because we haven't learned how to navigate to fill those groups. And that's where the mentorships and the sponsorships and the affinity groups, like what we're talking about, are so imperative, because that's also what allows women to move forward and stop seeing everyone as their competition or as the power struggle. And the moment we take power out of the equation, that's the moment that we can just move forward and support each other. And then I think that's where it comes down to looking at what's the real vision of the company. Are we buying into the vision of the company, or are we buying into our own vision of where we want to be, which is also elements of socialization and marginalization.
And I think being able to understand that it doesn't matter what society it's in, there has always been a circle of women, always. And we just have to be able to remember that we need to connect the circle of women in these places in order to make sure that we're doing stuff. Yes, there are some cultures that are a lot more salient in it than others, but being able to understand that, because that is something that is foundational in every single culture group. You have the women that got together to sew, the women who got together to cook, the women who got together to sing, the women who got together to do hair. All of these things that permeates just about every single culture that we're a part of. So that means that gives us evidence of our socialization, that we've been socialized to be communal. And communal means that we're helping each other come up. Like Edward Hall, when he talks about collectivism, it's about the good of one for the good of the all, not just so we can feel good and kumbaya. That's not what it is about. It's about being able to make sure that we all get uplifted. So how do we go back to that circle?
Yeah,
I think it's a really good point too, when you think about feminism, to be able to position it in a way, it's like, it's not just in the self-interest of women, it's in the interest of all. So
in the interest of all.
In the interest of all of us, because we all deserve equity. We all deserve that. And if we're fighting it for us, we're fighting it for all of you. And I think, to me, that's what womanism is mostly about.
Womanism is about, I'm doing this because we all got to come up. Right. That's essentially what it is. But and again, one of the examples that I used to give my students when it comes to feminism and womanism is like, womanism is harkening back to that circle of women to make sure that everybody is okay. But feminism is the theory of that, but with an individualist mindset. And because of that, it's not at any fault. It's just, I'm trying to do this thing under with the system that I've been given, but the system that you've been given has never been conducive to women being united in any way, truly. And that's why we have 4 waves of feminism. Then being able to really understand that distinction, so that you can be able to really look at what does it look like to do this for real, and not just by rhetoric.
So real quick, sorry.
That's womanism too. I think that's why we say in the book, people should check out womanism, because that's really what womanism is saying. And if we really look at solidarity, that's womanism.
Absolutely. So just wrapping up our 3rd episode here, in a quick recap, what would you say the top 3 solutions for white women violence would be that we can share with our listeners? I know it's a biggie.
Yeah. Take a breath.
And pause in the power.
There's a power in the pause. Yes. And be able to critically evaluate your emotions. Not just look at them, but critically evaluate what is the root cause of this particular emotion that you are feeling right now. And are you using your reaction as a release or a defense?
Great.
Those things are really important. And then being able to be okay with fixing it. I mean, I'm sorry, I did this, my bad. Let me make sure I don't do this again.
And I think having an anti-racist plan, by actually having a plan to say, this is what I plan to do, and this is how I'm going to be held accountable for that. And to create a circle of women that will also hold you accountable to that anti-racist work, so that when you start to slip back into your privilege or slip back into how do you right the ship again, how do you go back into making sure that you're not sitting on the laurels of privilege, but that you're actually being that catalyst for change and holding the men in your life accountable as well, and holding the other white people in your life accountable.
And I think if I was to add a point, like a subsection B to that, remove your negative connotations about racism, violence, aggression, and things of that nature, so that you're more objective about it, so that you can really see where those things manifest in your life. So remove the negative feelings and emotions behind it, and really be objective, so that when you're doing all of this work, you can really see what your role is, and not trying to dismiss or remove yourself away from what you see as the extremes of those words.
Right.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Cami and Joy, for, again, just another incredible episode on individual socialization, white women, violence, and what was our third? Our third was microaggressions. Oh my goodness. This has just been such an informative 3-part episode, and so awesome in how to help women in the workplace flip the script and begin making new cultural changes. Thank you, listeners, for being here with us on Wealthy Woman Warrior Tribes Thrive. Please join us in our next episode next week. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you listen to all 3 episodes and share these. There is power in us learning and developing together, so that we can understand how to transform the workplace culture that we're all existing in. Thank you so much. Have a brilliant day. Bye for now.